All right, so I'm going to click through this real quick. This is another game of Joshua's real quick, and it shows him playing a totally different style in a certain sense. This is a positional game. This Sicilian, when black plays d takes c6, transposes to like an e4, e5 pawn structure. And in these positions, black seems to have the whole center nicely covered, and it's very tricky how to get anything going as white in these positions here. I don't know who Robin Black or Hu Choi are, unfortunately. I'm sure they're awesome, right? You're not comparing me to something that sounds terrible, I hope. Okay, so white's doing this kingside pawn expansion, but actually the goal of this proves not to be to make a pawn storm on the king side, but to find a square to develop this bishop, which was stymied by the black b5 pawn. So white positionally is trying to trade these pieces and make some use of the d file here. And here's a very committal move by black b4. And white gives up the bishop pair, very smart decision, and trades into this position here. And now, suddenly, black has double isolated pawns, and white has the possibility to eventually dominate if they get their knight to c4. But black has potential counterplay on the f file and the chance to play c5, c4 quickly. So it's double-edged for the moment, but Josh plays perfect controlled play here. Quick queen to g3, getting off the file of the rook and starting to look at, starting to look at the pawn on e5, and also overprotecting g5, which needs to keep this bishop locked in. This fight is like fine wine. A lot of the color red involved, right? Is that how it's like fine wine? All right, so they fight for the d file. You know, black had to eventually challenge the d file because if they just go for something like c5, c4, white's playing rook to d1 and rook to d7. And he just can't like allow this rook into d7, I think, in this position. So he challenges the file. But perhaps he didn't need to trade the second rook in this position. This might be a defensive mistake by black, because now when this rook trade happens, it actually forces his bishop back to d8, which is really unfortunate. You know, if he just hangs in there, it's still going to take a while for white to go knight here to c4. So black may have time to defend himself a little bit better, but it is a tough position for black. But now white's able to come through c5 instead of b2, so he gets an extra threat on e6, then swings to d3, and wins this pawn. And this was, I mean, this is just a totally different kind of chess, it looks like, than what you saw Xiong do in the other game. Just trading the right pieces, you know, controlling the counterplay that would possibly be against f3 or g5 by black, and then maneuvering the knight in to go after these pawns. And then from here, he can win this endgame pretty easily, although there's a tactical phase here. But he breaks through and eventually wins off of this bishop being trapped by the pawn on g5. This was a very, very important element in the game. And the bishop can't come out here because of check here and mate. So he wins the bishop, and shortly thereafter, the game. So a different look to the game, but just showing, like, again, like, that Joshua was, like, on good form yesterday. I think that was a very, very nice positional game as well. You know, showing a certain, like, positional maturity. Those Sicilian positions that transpose with d takes c6 and e5 into kind of, like, doubled king pawn positional games, those are really hard to play well. Like, very few young players are good at playing those positions. And, you know, he made this one look really, really easy against an opponent who's like a very good Sicilian player. So that's 2 points for Joshua Xiong, 2 points for fourth board. And, you know, his contributions meant that, if I can find it, meant that the San Diego Surfers won their match, actually, against the San Jose Hackers and moved to 4-0. And they're now the only 4-0 team in the entire Pro Chess League. There were 6 going into week 4, and only one of the 6 teams won their 4th match, and that was the San Diego Surfers. And I think people are going to stop saying that they don't deserve their score after this week. I think. We'll see. We'll see what people say, but I think people are going to stop saying that because They beat back a really strong team, and they played fantastically, you know. And if they've got like a 16-year-old IM with a rating of 2,400 who can score against GMs, then obviously that's a dangerous team. Okay, so on to some other highlights. Here I've got a sweet little game for you, also from an important match. Okay, I'm not going to go through this whole game. I'm just going to set the stage for you here. White is Caden Troff from Utah, playing for the Las Vegas Desert Rats. And his opponent, I forget, WRY Lopez is an IM. Let's see who it is. Richard Costigan, maybe? Maybe Richard Costigan. That seem right? Nope. Or Costigan, Philadelphia. I don't know. Did they sub somebody in at some point? I am slightly confused. Well, whoever this opponent was, this is definitely Caden playing white, and Caden was playing for the Las Vegas Desert Rats, as I said. The Las Vegas Desert Rats don't have the greatest record, but they're quite strong. Thank you, Farhan. All right, Ebola, take care. Thanks for being here. You can catch the rest later. Yeah, and Farhan, thank you for the congrats on Lab Mayhem. Our Kickstarter is off to a pretty good start. We got more than half of what we need in the first day and a half. So thank you for the well wishes, and anybody who wants to help us, just spread the word about that to other game lovers, that we appreciate any support getting that game published and getting the art completed so that we can get it into stores. Okay, so back to this game. Caden's playing white. I'm just going to click along to the position of interest to me. Dum, 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 dum. All right, so positional game so far, locked game. Caden's playing with a space advantage, and now also with the idea of maybe his knights being good on light squares versus the black bishop. Ever since he went for this bishop to g4 move, that's probably been one of his ideas, is to hopefully get a knight to one of those yummy squares. So that starts to become a reality once his knight comes to e3. He brings the rook to the king side, and there we go. The knight is on f5. So that's a proud knight, and difficult for black to fight back against. Black goes with bishop g5. Caden brings the other knight towards the king side and controls the possibility of bishop f4 blocking his rook. Chess Kings, no, I'm not being paid to do this at the moment. I'm just doing it for my entertainment and your entertainment. All right, so he swings the knight towards the king side, g6. So this is exactly what black would hope to play. And the move bishop g5 was largely to block the queen and try and make it possible to play g6. So this is like the clear strategic goal for black, is to get a pawn on g6, right? Like, overall, his light squares are weak. This knight's a problem. But if he could somehow have a pawn on g6 and at least keep knights out of f5 and h5, his king would be most grateful for that, right? And his position would certainly appreciate it. So bishop g5, and black goes for like the critical attempt here with g6. Okay? And the goal is to get this knight out of f5 and keep some control over these light squares. Now, you might see that there's some significant tactical elements involved here, right? So this is like, yes, strategically, this is a good idea, but tactically, does it work or not? Super tricky to figure out. So the queen has a hidden attack on the king. The g6 pawn is barely defended. The bishop on g5 is barely defended, right? And all of these three things are on the same line. 3 tactical weaknesses for black, all on the same line. So there's a chance that this isn't quite going to work out, right? Chess Kings, we can discuss your questions another time, but I think most people would rather I go through these chess highlights. Yeah. So stick around after my show and I will answer any questions you have. Okay? Meanwhile, if you've got any chess questions, ask me any chess questions about this position. I'm sure everybody would benefit from any chess questions that you guys have with regard to this, so that I pace this at the right level for everybody, and don't leave out like something that you guys are all wondering about. Okay, so Caden's going to trade once. Now this pawn is like absolutely undefended, hidden by this, and now he goes knight h4, and obviously, this is a tactical move, not a strategic move at this point. He's going for g6. He's going for direct tactical threats here. The move knight h4 actually introduces a double threat. Threat number 1 is knight takes g6, and threat number 2 is rook takes f7, followed by queen g5, right? So we'll remove the defender on this piece here. So knight h4 introduces a double threat. Well, one way for black to deal with the double threat is to play bishop takes h4, right? That means the bishop's no longer hanging here and the knight's no longer attacking this. And now, if white just plays queen takes h4, maybe black has a chance to defend themselves. It still looks a little bit tough, but this knight's completely kept at bay at the moment. So it's just a rook and queen attacking against a queen, knight, and rook. So the threat is rook f6, and ugly as this looks, black might be able to defend this position by moving this knight to d8 or something. I guess he can't go to h8 because there'll be a remove the defender tactic here, right? So he might have to play this ugly move knight to d8. But this might actually defend him. If he can just trade this rook and stop rook f6, then the queen's not gonna win by herself, is she? Don't be so sure, right? She wins a pawn there. Could come here instead. Check here. Now she can win this pawn, but black counterattacks here, and black's in the game. It's messy, though. This knight comes into the game. This is not 100% clear whether or not this would work out as a defense for black, right? I mean, we have to calculate some weird possibilities. It looks like this line wins for white, like they get a strong enough attack with just these, sorry, mouse slip, with just these pieces. First take pawn, then bishop. Yeah. So anyway, black may or may not be able to offer a defense here against the rook f6 threat if given a tempo like this. But I am certain that Caden's plan was probably not to take back, but to play queen g6 check instead. Now, the only legal move is king over here, and then rook to f5 coming to h5. Although, maybe I haven't thought this all the way through. Then there's bishop g5, kind of cutting you off. So maybe at this point, he would just have to come back here, and then take the bishop, which is what Farhan was suggesting doing, I think. So now white's definitely up a pawn and then can continue attacking against the king. His knight has access to f5 now. Yeah, this seems pretty good, right? But interestingly, I don't think my rook f5 move works that well against bishop g5. I mean, the other idea would be to play rook f3, trying to go to h3. And if here, then you can take this piece, right? So yeah, I mean, white's probably still good after rook f3, but I think it's just queen h5 and take this is correct. So knight h4. So black can't solve his problems by just taking it. He loses the pawn on g6, and then white recovers the bishop at least with his attack. So black plays king g7 defending this. Now, one of the reasons I selected this highlight is not just that I think it's pretty sweet, but I think it illustrates a super important chess idea, which I almost never see anybody talk about, so it might be new to you guys. And that is the ebb and flow of tactical energy. Does that ring any bells? The ebb and flow of tactical energy? Basically, my concept is like this. In order to do something tactical, I use up my tactical energy to accomplish something. For example, in this position, white has the possibility of playing rook f7, then black takes back, and then white can take on g5. So I win material with a forcing sequence. Or chess judo, sure, that might be a good, there might be some very similar concepts in martial arts to this as well. But the point is, once I've done that, I will have used up my tactical energy. There will no longer be a knight under pressure and a bishop under pressure because I will use those up. Also, I'm going to be giving tactical energy to my opponent. After I execute a tactical operation, my own pieces are usually somewhat scattered. So my queen, which was now defended, when it goes and captures black's piece, it'll then be on an undefended square. Okay? One of the like very, very simple chess examples of this that I use is this one here. So in this position, you know, black has this pawn that's like barely defended, right? And white has this bishop applying pressure to the knight and king along this diagonal. But once you trade and capture their pawn, you've used all your tactical energy. What bad tactical elements does black have left, right? They don't have like a defender that's under pressure. They don't have a pawn that's barely defended. But what do we have? The piece that captures in a winning tactical thing is almost always hanging at the end of that, right? Because if you had e5 attacked like 3 times and all sieged up and then you just took it, I mean, that wouldn't be like, you know, why didn't you take it the move before when you had it attacked twice, right? You don't normally have a piece like attacked so many times that you can capture it and you land on an outpost when you capture it, right? So after you take, suddenly white's the one who has all these weak tactical points, right? And here the tactical energy, right, flows back towards black. They have their choice between this double attack or this double attack. Okay, so that's like the very, very simple illustration of the kind of like ebb and flow. And this one here is like a more complicated grandmaster level example of that. Okay, so what it means also is often right after you do a tactic, there's actually a counter tactic that refutes your tactic. So you come up with some combination. You're like, yeah, I do this, 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 and at the end I win a piece. And then you do it all, and after you've done your whole combination, you're looking at the position, you're like, oh my gosh, my opponent has like a double attack now to just win back the piece right away, right? Or now suddenly my opponent has a counter attack to checkmate me on the back rank, right? Because you've thrown your pieces onto precarious positions using up your tactical energy to achieve something. Now your opponent has a counter play, a counter tactical energy. So in this position, Caden has to calculate very carefully. He goes for rook f7, queen g5. But now he's brought the black queen. He's activated the black queen when he sacked for that knight that was stuck, right? Like this queen that couldn't do very much, he's brought it into the game. Now black's all powered up. Then he takes with his queen. Now his queen is undefended, but also she's left the vicinity of his king, and so these squares are undefended. And this knight's undefended, right? So black can immediately counterattack. Queen f2, check, and capture this. Oops. He traded 2 pieces for a rook, and at the end his own piece is hanging. So that's the first ebb and flow, but Caden had looked further ahead at this one, and he'd seen that even after this, now black's position is undefended, right? After black goes for this counterattack with the queen and wins his knight, now black's king is undefended by this queen, and this pawn is undefended. So now he gets the next wave of his attack. Queen g6 check, king h8 only legal move, knight f5. He's threatening checkmate here. There's no further checks against his own king, right? Queen h5 and queen g2 accomplish little. So black doesn't have time for queen e4 because of mate. And rook g8 to cover the g7 square. There's checkmate on h6. So after knight f5, this proves to be a winning sort of attack from Caden at the end of it. So first, he sees a tactile opportunity to win two sort of dangling pieces for his rook. But it gives his opponent the energy to counterattack him and win one of his dangling pieces. But then after his opponent does the counterattack, he has a straightforward attack against the black king that wins for him. And so all black could do was sack the rook for the knight to avoid checkmate. And Caden transposes, with all that calculation, he transposes into this queen and pawn ending where he's got a winning plan of like f6, queen g7. And black plays queen here to threaten perpetual check. He plays queen h6 to cover black's checks, and then plays f6, bringing back up his checkmate. Black plays queen f4, takes. So black avoided the checkmate, and by one tempo, he still wins this king and pawn ending. Okay? So, to my mind, that was super sweet. I think for a grandmaster like Caden, that was not like the most difficult calculation of his life. I remember analyzing with him when he was like 12 years old, and he could have already calculated that probably. But it's a super sweet moment, and hopefully for those of you watching, it has helped illuminate my concept of the ebb and flow of tactical energy, how you use up your energy to accomplish something, but right after you do so, you're usually vulnerable to your opponent being able to do so. So very often you have to calculate like my tactic, their counter tactic. Do I have their counter tactic covered, or do I even have my counter tactic after that? Yeah. Farhan gives another very nice metaphor for this. It's like while you're refilling the bullets, your opponent has a chance, right? So right after you've taken your shots is like a moment when you're very vulnerable yourself. Okay, so always keep that in mind when you're undertaking aggressive action in chess, that's the moment where you're leaving yourself vulnerable. I mean, you can also think of it like, imagine yourself when you're poised to like fight. Like I don't know anything about boxing, but let's say you're like poised to fight, like boxing or martial arts or something. I would imagine like you're in a position at first where you're very flexible and you could either defend or attack, right? But then like at the moment right where you've like thrown a punch or thrown a kick or something, I would imagine that like right at the moment where you finished like a punch or a kick, you're in a much less flexible and much more exposed position yourself for a moment, right? Lovely IAMism. Thank you for contributing that. So that may be a concept that holds true against all sorts of different disciplines of like conflict and fighting. And I have found to definitely be a fundamental dynamic in the game of chess. Okay? So there you have that one. Let me just copy that real quick and bring up another one for y'all. All right. Next up, I've got a game from Jeffrey Xiong. So Jeffrey Xiong, for those of you who don't know, is like the highest rated 16-year-old in the world. American player from Dallas, Texas area. Plays for the Dallas Destiny. He's played for them before in the U.S. Chess League. Now he plays for them in the Pro Chess League. Dallas Destiny were at 2-1. They won their match this week and moved to 3-1. Jeffrey is super high rated. If we go look him up on the top 100, he just had a great tournament at Tata Steel, and we'll find that he's moved up to being the number 4 rated U.S. chess player in the country right now, I think. There he is, Jeffrey Xiong, number 70 at 26.74 FIDE. He had a great result at the Tata Steel tournament in Wake-on-Zay and passed Onishuk, Shankland, and Robson in 1 week. And he's now number 4 in the country behind our top trio of Wesley So, actually from the Philippines, Caruana, actually Italian Federation, and Nakamura, actually U.S. Federation. So Jeffrey Xiong now all the way up to number 4 in the U.S. And also, as you can tell, there aren't like other 16-year-olds on this top 100 list. I don't think so anyway. I don't see any. So, yeah. So that's who it is. Jeffrey Xiong. He was playing in Tata Steel. That's why he hasn't played yet in the Pro Chess League, and this was his debut. And here's a game of his which spun my head around. All right? This game is just awesome. I don't know if it's good or bad either. Like, it is just... It's the kind of crazy town that I like. So here you go. White plays a very calm, restrained-looking opening. This e4 move, black can't take because of queen d5. So now the position gets a little bit weird when white suddenly plays e4, e5 when you thought he was being all solid with c3. The knight makes a lot of sense coming to c4, but then it doesn't come to c4. Yeah, I would think like knight c4 makes a lot of sense, but here white makes the decision to go after this. And if you play bishop b7 to not lose a pawn, I think white plays c4. And yeah, I'm with you, Roboto Chef. It's awesome, therefore good. So there might be blunders for both sides, but to me, that doesn't make a chess game bad, okay? I guess when I was saying, like, I don't know if it's good or bad, I mean, like, I don't know if, like, somebody sitting at home, like, hitting spacebar on their 3,000 rated computer is going to be like, oh, no, this game was terrible. He just missed 27, rook to g3, and then he blundered and blah, blah, blah. I don't know if, like, the game holds up to any of that kind of stuff. But to me, if you play a game interesting and complicated enough that both players make mistakes, that doesn't make it a bad game. I'm perfectly interested in seeing that game. Anyway, this one ranks awesome for me. So bishop e4, knight c6, and Sean Nagel playing white goes for the win of this d5 pawn. Sean Nagel was an old chess buddy of mine. I think he's exactly my age. An old chess buddy of mine. Briefly when we met at like the U.S. Junior and some tournaments when we were like, I don't know, 19, 20, 21 years old. And I haven't seen him in a million years, but he was a super cool guy then. He's probably still a cool guy. And he plays for the Minnesota Blizzard. All right, so he's playing white against Jeffrey. He wins this pawn. I'm a little skeptical of a plan of playing bishop d3, e4, and winning this pawn on e4 because, to me, look at white's pawn structure, sort of especially in the center. I would think the light squared bishop is really valuable, and I wouldn't be pumped about spending that much time in the opening trading it off. Jeffrey, on the other hand, he's down a pawn. He's going to try and justify it. He goes to the light squares. Okay, so now if you block out this bishop, then presumably you have to deal with knight to b4 and d5 maybe. Opening things up. Yeah, I would think so. Knight to b4. Queen. I don't know, d1. d5. Pawn takes. Bishop takes. Castle. I mean, Jeffrey still just has to play down a pawn here as far as I can tell. There's no obvious refutation to the pawn c4, is there? Yeah, I don't think there's any obvious refutation to it. I mean, I think he can play some position like this. He's got the bishop pair and an open position and some development. So it should be playable. just try this position. But Xiong blocks the bishop with his knight, like this. And Jeffrey's like, no, I really, really need this diagonal to be open. You don't understand. Like, if you just get to castle and keep control of like the center like this, I might as well resign. So yeah, I gotta do this. So he opens up the diagonal again. And now he plays the first super cool move of the game. I don't know if it's good or bad by the computer standards, but it is a sweet idea. Bishop G5. So, yeah, White wants to just trade that bishop, possibly castle queenside at some point, and here he just leaves the bishop hanging on e7. And it's like a massive sacrifice, right? Because if the bishop takes, the plan is not rook to e8. The plan is rook takes b2. Just, you take the bishop, the rook's hanging, whatever. He's just trying to threaten queen c3 and rook to e2, and he's getting an attack going. And yeah, I mean, I guess rook to c1 would try and defend this square here. And maybe now he could play rook to b8 and try to keep attacking from here. You can also throw in rook e2 if you want. Like rook e2, the king can't come here because you lose the queen to rook d2, or rook c2, c1. So king here. Queen a4, queen b3, I don't think that wins, so maybe just bring out the next piece. And yeah, keep playing from here. If rook c2, rook b1. So rook b8, he just plays that, leaving this hanging. And Xiong comes back and defends b2. And here it feels like everything's going Jeffrey's way. Right? He gets this like threat. He gets White to play this retreating move. Now, since he got the queen to retreat to d2, he can play rook e8 because his f7 pawn's not hanging, right? That's why this is like super important, this rook b8 tempo. And the queen's not on d5 attacking or defending this. So he gets to play this move with a threat of rook e5, which is like a devastating threat. But Xiong plays f4, and actually what we realize is it looks like everything's going Jeffrey's way to me, like, oh, it's over, he's crushing him. But actually, what I started realizing was actually it's not that easy for Jeffrey here. He's still got to justify his pawn sack. He seems to have everything going, but White actually only needs to play king f2 and then rook e1, and White's position is pretty good. So actually, the move f4 is not like such an undesirable move for White here, because that's their way to get organized, is to play king f2. Now, the move f6, which I would want to play, gets mated by queen d5. You guys remember that queen and knight checkmate? This comes up all the time. It just never actually gets played because people see it coming. But it's a super common pattern to be threatened or to come up in some tactics. So Jeffrey plays queen a4, king f2, and now d6. Okay, so on queen d6, there's rook b2, and on pawn d6, there's rook e2, right? Okay, so we know that White can't take this pawn right away, and he wants to take here. So that makes sense. White plays b3 with a tempo on the queen, weakening this rook's file. Very, very nice. Now he threatens queen h7 check. And he's trying to force like a concession like g6 out of black, and then potentially he might have had in mind playing knight to e4. Like Xiong might have been just trying to end the game here. And then he's threatening knight f6 or knight d6. And if you get out of the way of, if you allow knight f6, you're sacking your rook, right? And if you get out of the way of knight f6 and allow knight takes d6, like this or something, this is looking pretty hard for black to break through, right? And their pieces, they're not like completely in position to break through. So what Jeffrey decides is like, yeah, I can't afford another weakening. I just need to crack things open now before things get any worse, before Xiong plays rook to e1. So he goes d takes e5, just allowing queen h7. Sure, queen h7, yeah? Now here's a nice move by Xiong. You don't want to like when possible, instead of chasing, you want to cut your opponent off. So he just brings his rook to the e-file right away. If pawn takes f4, then this is checkmate and 1. And Jeffrey's really scrambling for counterplay here. Yeah, totally right, Roboto Chef. It suddenly feels like white actually has the good position. And you could interpret what Jeffrey's doing here by sacking his king side as being like desperation because he agrees with you, right? And similar, like, you know, as I gave in the variation where white stops queen h7 and play like knight e4, like I'm feeling like black might have lost. Like it might be all but over here. You know, just no room to find enough counterplay now as white goes up like 2 pawns and has a pretty solid structure. Okay, so you could definitely interpret d5 as maybe being desperation. You could interpret it as genius or desperation. I don't know. It's your choice. He goes like this, and now Jeffrey switches the bishop to this diagonal now that it's not doing anything here anymore. And the rook's been blocked anyway either. So both the bishop and rook actually needed improvement again at this point. So he goes bishop b7. You know, and this threat to checkmate on g2 is not that easy to stop. Like white doesn't have 10,000 different defenses. But what he does have is a pretty good offense. And here he chases the black king somewhere horrible. He has to play rook d1 because he doesn't want his rook hanging at the end when he stops this checkmate here with queen h3. You can also stop it with knight f3, but at the cost of losing your queen. So he comes here. And you can see he couldn't have left the rook on a1. So he had to give this whole sequence of checks to get to this position. Okay. But now white is still up 2 pawns. And it seems that every white piece is developed. To be honest, the worst piece on the board looks like the rook on b8. Not one of white's pieces, but black's rook. He's got the checkmate covered. Like, does Jeffrey still even have like a shot at this game? Or has he just been like bulldozed off the board by this great play? Well, the one thing that I think Jeffrey really still does have positionally is that this bishop is super strong. It's like unopposable, and that's quite a diagonal, and this is quite like a long-term threat that white has to keep trying to defend this. So Jeffrey plays rook to d8. So now he's going after white's back rank, right? If you play rook e8, then this is checkmate. And if you trade on d8, then actually maybe black throws in queen c1, queen f4. I was going to say, my cursory look was like, then you see this file and you have to deal with rook d2 and rook d1. But now I wonder if this isn't even a problem as well. Queen here, right? You can't block on either of these squares. And if you go here, he gets this pawn with check. The bishop's covering here. You kind of need to go knight f3. And now maybe rook d8. So now we've regained one of the 2 pawns that we were behind and still have the good bishop and control of the d file. So it's like plausible that black could be in this game here. It's also plausible that white might somehow consolidate and have a big advantage. I don't think rook c5. I don't think he has time for that because of rook d2 coming after king b6. I'd be surprised if here white has enough time to play that. But okay, so rook b d8 is played. White plays rook to f1, ceding the d file. And Jeffrey just plays rook d2, leaving this rook still hanging, right? And going for rook g2. And you see how this is kind of a sore spot. So white, I think at this point, is compelled to block with knight f3 is the only way to really defend that square on g2. And then Jeffrey trades here and here. So still down 2 pawns. Some kind of activity for all his pieces, but still messy. There's a threat of knight d2, so he doesn't have time for queen c3, cleaning up one of the pawns he's down. In this kind of position, by the way, people, in this kind of position, if I were only down 1 pawn, I would usually feel like, yeah, I've got some activity, I've got a fighting shot, I'm just down a pawn, like I might have a draw within reach. But when you're down 2 pawns, as like a master playing against other masters, when you're down 2 pawns, you really feel like you're like in the losing zone. You're like really like, I need something serious, not just like, oh, I'm active, but like I need to be really doing something pretty important here. So the rook's got to move. It goes here, keeps its eye on this pawn here. Queen g3, this threatens e6, ef7, and then pretty much unstoppably queening because e6 would be check. So no time to save the g7 pawn, that's for sure. Jeffrey's king keeps going. And white is feeling very confident here and grabs another pawn. Jeffrey responds by grabbing this pawn, hoping to still win one of these. And Xiong shows why he grabbed the pawn on g7. His winning plan is to run this h-pawn. Realistically, like, he can't really challenge the second rank, and he can't really challenge the bishop's diagonal, right? So, I mean, he sort of came up with the winning plan that makes sense to me. The only thing that he can, like, safely move without disrupting his defense of f3, g2, and the back rank, and the second rank, the only thing he can really win with is, like, the g-pawn. So from that perspective, like, queen g3 seems, like, brilliant. Like, get rid of that. Now you've got a winning plan. So Jeffrey starts collecting pawns on this side of the board. And now he realizes, like, oh, okay, he doesn't have a lot on the king side. It's kind of like white owns this whole area, and there's not really much that's going to stop this h-pawn. So he plays bishop e4 to try and control that square, h6, and now you see why he didn't spend time on queen c3, because h7 would cost him the bishop, right? And then white can win in a million ways. So he actually has to play queen to c2 to try and cover h7 like this. Okay, so the score now. White is only up one pawn because Jeffrey found time to capture a couple pawns on this side of the board. But this pawn is, as you say, not all pawns are equal. This pawn here is a special pawn, is a problem. So it's kind of tying up the black pieces a little bit, which gives white a lot of room to try and do something here. That said, he still needs his queen to stop rook g2, and these pieces are still extremely active as far as threatening his king, and they're still keeping an eye on h7 at the same time. Black finally has a winning plan as well. He can move his a pawn without relaxing his grip on the position. So king h2, king b5, queen g4, king c4. Jeffrey brings in the king. So e5, this is a clearance sack. He gives his knight the e5 square in some tactical lines. And now he goes for h7 when the bishop can't take it. The only defense to queening is now this one. All right, and now it looks like he's queened the pawn. Seems like there's no longer any defense to this. If queen takes, then this is check, so there's no time to take here. But it turns out this queen e5 move is a mistake. Jeffrey seizes his opportunity here to save the game. Anyone got an idea how he does that? Actually, I'm not even sure about how all this works, but Jeffrey goes for rook g2 check. And in the game, the justification is seen. Xiong takes the rook and queen takes, and this is pinned, and he still has h8 covered. Bishop takes pawn here. I think that loses to rook d1 check, Farhan. The king has to keep an eye on the queen and has to keep an eye on the rook. So it's kind of like an overworked king. And white should win here. So rook g2 check. What I still haven't checked is what happens if king to h3. So we can figure this out together now. This is an unusual position, right? The black king here, the pawn queening, both kings just completely open. Weird pieces in the center tactically. But what does black do after just king h3? This was what I wasn't sure of. Well, we can try moving some pieces. That might help us. Trade queens, check. King moves somewhere. What kind of options are there? Pretty much anywhere we go. White can queen. And then I don't really see anything better than just taking this. And this position looks, looks like something that white should win with the queen and knight attacking. So that's queen takes queen pretty much. If we go bishop takes f3, this looks like the worst option. White takes it with check, then takes our queen, and then makes a second queen. So that move hangs two queens. Why is it easier to see when there's more pieces? Well, usually there aren't this many checks and captures available in a position. Also, since none of these pieces are like rooted on like defended squares by pawns, like any piece could die at any moment in any tactic. So it's a little bit more like tactically bewildering than the normal positions you see. Normally, if you're like watching like a master game, like at most points every single one of their pieces is like defended, right? And then every now and then for one or two moves some tactics explode and they're vulnerable for a couple moments as one player is trying to win, but usually every piece is defended most of the game. Okay, other options. We could go bishop takes h7 now, so then check here and here wins for white. This move here, trying to go for some kind of counter something or other, it should probably lose to knight e1 check. And then the king moves somewhere and knight takes queen. I can't imagine that black has enough there. So I don't know what black's supposed to do about king h3. Nobody else is calling anything out. So it might be that there just wasn't anything. So it might be that Sean Nagel was actually winning this game up till this move had he played king h3. Because really I don't see how black now defends against queen trade and queening and king takes here and rook d1 and knight e1, which all seem threatened. So rook to e2 maybe. Yeah. So here, the idea would be to go here, here, and then get the queen with check, and then try and like wrap up somehow after that. So my feeling here is that there may have been like a blunder here where Sean took on g2. Maybe he thought he was like steps away from winning and just that rook g2 was desperation and just took it and didn't realize. Maybe he thought the point was to remove the defender of his queen with check, and then he's got counter check. But in any case, it looks like king h3. Yeah, they had like seconds. to play. It looks like king h3, white might strangely cap this brilliant game and win against GMs Xiong. But regardless of who was objectively winning or losing this game, I would say a lot of credit to both players for a wild and brilliant game, because there was a lot of fantastic stuff done in that game. Jeffrey's decision to march his king over to the queen side by allowing queen h7 check and rook e1, rook e5 check, rook d1, all of that was pretty awesome. And then after that, he embarks on a second king march. Once he's safe on the queen side, he brings his king up like into the center of the board. And the whole time he's, down material and trying to stay active and trying to make threats. It's really special. Yeah. So, cool game. And let's go on to another highlight. All right, I'm going to grab this one real quick. PGN. Copy it here. Paste it. Here we go. Boom. Boom. Oh, that's fine. That position's fine. I don't have another stream scheduled yet. I will probably go into work tomorrow because I took 3 days this week to stream: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So my next stream, maybe next week. Probably take at least 1 day next week to stay home and stream chess. But I haven't picked which day yet. I'll look at my calendar tomorrow night and figure it out. But yeah, now that I have this other job I'm trying to do, it's harder for me to predict when I will stream. Depends when they call me in. Okay, so yeah, no need to be enigmatic about it. The other job is substitute teaching in elementary school. So because I don't know in advance always which days they're going to need me. And then if there's a day that they don't need me, that's the best day for me to stream. If they need me every day, I'll probably take 1 day off to stream. There's the full explanation. Okay, so this position here, this is a game between Andrei Vovk and Timur Gareyev. So this is again the match between the Philadelphia Inventors, one of the 3-0 teams from the Central Division, against the Desert Rats from Las Vegas. Timur Gareyev representing the Desert Rats. And the Desert Rats actually had a really nice stream themselves of their match with their own, with some of their own players commenting, like Caden, who we already saw a game from today. He was on their stream. Jacek Stopa from Poland was on the stream. So they've got a cool stream for anybody who's a fan specifically of the Las Vegas team. You could check out their dedicated stream. Hopefully they do that again for some of their future matches. So here, Andrei Vovk started out the league 7.5 out of 8 in the first 2 weeks. And his team started out with a 3-0 record. So he's the board one, and their team is doing super well, and he personally is playing super well. Here, Gareyev is playing a weird modern against him, and Vovk gets really aggressive here with this move G4. I mean, really aggressive. Farhan, I'm trying to teach chess right now. That's my answer. I'm trying to teach chess. I think I've been doing it for over 20 years. I think I'm succeeding some of the time. Okay, so he takes, and Timur takes this pawn on e4. And obviously Black's development at the moment is not as good as White's. So there's going to be some compensation for the pawn sack. This move is an undesirable move, but Timur's move knight b6 introduced this kind of like annoying knight c4. What white would like to do would be play moves like rook e1 and bishop h6 and f4, f5. Those are the moves that are like desirable, but he feels like he has to deal with knight c4, so he spends a move to play queen d3. And now Gareyev fights back. He strikes back in the center with c5. He leaves all his pawns hanging just to like, start getting his pieces out and gaining some space for potential counterattacks on the white king position. And yeah, I mean, this is like a good choice. You leave so much hanging, it's like more confusing for white to choose what to take. And also, I would much rather be down like a pawn or two but have my pieces out than be like cramped in there and white's just playing f5 while I do nothing. Okay, so b3 is played first, preventing bishop a2, preventing knight or bishop to c4. But this is not like an unpleasant thing to see from black's perspective. I'd be super happy to see that I can just play c4 and trade a pawn at some point. So somehow b3 looks like a bad move to me, I want to say. Could be wrong. Timur develops this rook, and now Vovk just grabs the pawn on b7. And he just connects his rooks with a tempo here. Bishop comes back, and now here come Timur's pawns. And now this is like the hanging pawn structure. And if white's king were like on h1 and his pawn were on g3, it would be like a normal position, but his king's on c1. So things are about to get super, super violent. And honestly, like Vovk has not really done anything that he would have wanted to do for the last like 4 moves. He has never found time for f4. He hasn't ever played rook to e1 and tried to like take control of the e file before Timur coordinated his rooks. So I feel like his position is dramatically worse than it was 4 moves ago. So one move I don't like, b3, and a second move I don't like. Why take that pawn, man? Where's that going? When I'm opposite side castling, guys, I don't even want my pawns. Like, I would just take all 3 of these off the board if black would say, like, sure, I'll have your pawns. I would take them off. And if my opponent offered me, like, you can just take off the b7 pawn. You don't even have to spend a move playing bishop b7, okay? You don't even have to play bishop takes b7. You can just take my b pawn off the board, and then you can still play f4. I would accept their offer and say, yes, b pawn off the board. It's yours. So to spend a whole tempo taking it, I think that's got to be a bad move too. Anyway, here we are. Queen to b5. He's trying to like find some kind of weakness here on c5 to restrain black's activity. Queen f6 looks like a potentially great move for Farhan. Yeah, trying to get in here. Kind of hard to block that diagonal, right? Like, you're welcome to this pawn. I come here. And if pawn to c3, then use that as a hook to blow some stuff open here, maybe. Right? Definitely a thought. Yeah. Again, I don't even care if white takes this pawn from me, really. Not very much. But what I do want to avoid as black is I want to avoid a blockade. You wouldn't want white to capture this pawn, then blockade on d4. And sort of like block this pawn and this bishop and this rook, right? You don't want him to like slow things down. You want to be able to like trade lots of pawns, right? So d4 is played by Timur. And it's with tempo. The bishop has to go somewhere bad. And then he comes d3. Yar! And I think this is like the reason why he went for d4 over your queen f6 idea, which is perfectly playable as well. But d4 here, you're going to see it's got a really sweet point with d3. So d3 is trading off white's c2 pawn, which is a major part of his king's defense. And the reason this works is that if pawn takes d3, he has bishop d7. It's an unusual but very simple tactic, right? This is an example of like, I could give you this position and be like, what's black's best move? And it might be really hard for a lot of people to notice bishop d7. But as far as like raw calculating power, right? It doesn't require you to look at like 10 branches or to look at, or to look 6 moves ahead or anything like of what's normally considered difficult tactically. It's just a matter of noticing like a slightly unusual pattern and like a retreating move that wins something. So d3, he can't take it. He moves the knight to c3, and now Timur plays c4. And this is like the dream This is the dream. I mean, the c pawn can't avoid getting traded because it's like blocked. He could have taken it, and he was like, sure, I can always take it next move as well. And now he's trying to trade this one too. And this game is just, it's just a party for Timur from here on out. White plays b4 to avoid having every pawn traded, right? You see he wants to go here, here, then trade that one there, and then just everything is open. So he plays b4, and now Timur trades one pawn on c2, right? And his reason is he can bring in his other piece. White threatens the rook, and Timur brings in his other piece. And yeah, it's getting pretty hot in here, as Jesse Cry always used to say when we would analyze chess games. White's in the big trouble. He played like rook g3, trying to improve his worst piece and have some influence on what's going on. But I guess the interesting move that we could look at would be if White accepted the rook sacrifice. That might be fun to look at for a second. So let's say Black takes with the pawn. I don't even know if Black wants to take with the pawn or rook. Taking with the rook keeps the rook active. Taking with the pawn activates the knight and bishop in a way. But let's just look at one of them first and see what we see. So where should the king go? I don't really want to be on this diagonal. Yep, I'm right. I'm first eliminating moves that are like obviously bad, but the point is that now when the king moves somewhere, I don't know where it might be, but that he can like take here and this knight's hanging. So definitely no king to b2. Which also probably loses to bishop d7, knight a4 check, as well as knight c4. King to b2 or b1. Let's just go to b1. If we go, or c1. If we go to c1, then we're on the c file, right? So I'm going to guess that that's also going to be really bad for that reason. Does that seem like that piece is dead? Feels like it to me. I guess like you could defend for a move with the queen. Then Black can play knight a4 or queen b4. And you can try and defend it for a little while, but there's no way that White's defending this piece for very long. And there's queen b2 threatened as well. All right, so now we've eliminated king b2 and king c1, so that just leaves king to b1. I think we might still play knight c4, actually, even in this position. Because so knight c4 is threatening knight a3, I'm noticing. And it's also threatening knight d2, rook d2, and taking the knight. So it's making some major threats here. Which means White has to like move one of these pieces. You can cover knight a3 like this, but then Black just takes this piece, and then they play d2. This rook sack is looking pretty sound, right? Does anybody feel like White probably has a defense? Is there anybody here who's like, yeah, White can probably defend this? I mean, like any queen move to stop knight a3 is going to allow this and this, right? Like queen a6, stop this. With the idea that here, maybe I can try and defend with this. But Black always has queen b4 and utter violence. Plus, they can do that before trading anything and just play some boring checkmate, right? Yeah, so this is winning for Black. Okay? No take that rook. No take the rook. Knight d5 going after knight b4. I remember thinking that this move might win when I was watching the game. With the idea of just taking this rook for free. Then White can threaten checkmate for one move. And then I play f6 and White resigns. So this is sound. After this move, I can go check here and take the queen, right? Or since I'm up a rook, I can also just trade queens and play out this end game. with an extra rook and 2 minor pieces or something. So, yeah, so I think that was pretty convincing. Timur goes knight d5, and it was just like carnage from here. It was just absolute bloody carnage. White tried to avoid that trade and defend the b4 pawn, and then black just played bishop d7, chasing the queen, getting rid of that pawn, and then rook g3. And here white didn't even take the rook back because the tactic is that bishop a4 check is coming from black, I think. So like here, for example, bishop a4 here, and there's more than one bad thing that can happen here. Maybe the worst is queen e5 might be worse than taking these pieces. All right, later, Farhan. We'll just leave white with this position here and assume that this was bad enough. So, you know, Timur took this rook. White couldn't even take it back. Timur checks and wins the other rook. Threatens checkmate. He's like knight e3 check. King e2 takes this. Oh, man. This is like the most violence you'll ever see in like a GM versus GM game in the end here. So that was a really big win for Timur. I mean, and very important because actually this match ended tied 8-8, I think. It was like, you know, as tight as a match could be. So everything was really, really important. And this was board 1 against board 1 in the last round, right? With the match like 1 point ahead for the Philadelphia Inventors, and Timur like wins this violent game as black. That was pretty sweet. And yeah, I've got another Timur game as well here on my list. But first, let me just copy over this PGN actually. Do. Okay. Now this game here is also awesome, but this game is actually the reason why the Las Vegas Rats were in a slight hole, in a way. This is the game in which Timur is playing white against the Philadelphia Inventors third board, Grandmaster Brian Smith from Alaska. I think Brian had a pretty good day in the match. Let's see his score. I mean, it was a tight match. Let's see. Draw against Caden, win against Timur, draw against Elliot Liu, tough game, and then losing on time against Jacek Stopa in like a decisive game. That would have been one of the Inventors' chances to win the match. Would have been if Brian Smith as black had been able to draw this endgame here. You guys can't see the A file. Each side has an A pawn. So just trust me, this endgame was like kind of a close endgame, and he lost on time, and that could have decided the match. But what I'm going to show you now is Brian's almost certainly best game from the match. I think this is like a super good game. He's playing black here against Timur. Timur plays some unusual openings. Here he goes for the Trumpovsky. And Brian responds very aggressively with c5 and queen b6. Brian is an aggressive player, I would say. I mean, GMs can do all kinds of stuff. Brian's got a healthy dose of aggression in his style. And Timur just sacks the b pawn, as is the normal response to your opponent playing queen b6 too early in the game. You just Say, okay, you got my b pawn. Let's see what I can develop. Queen b2, knight takes knight, queen b4. Black wins back the piece. So this is a nice tactic to know. I mean, it's opening theory, but for those of you who don't know it, it's a nice tactic that after knight d2, you don't have to trade and develop white's pieces. You can just take here, then check, and then take like this. Nice to spend a tempo saving this piece too. And aggressive move g5. The tactical justification is that if he takes, you play here, hitting the bishop, and queen c3 check is a little bit awkward for white because it's going to force him to play king e2. And king e2 is not really, it's like super not conducive to all your other development plans. So g5, plays f3 to kick the queen, queen g6, bishop here. So Brian obviously has kind of like a weird and aggressive position here, right? I mean, like, not aggressive like he's going to attack, aggressive like he's going to get himself attacked. But there's a certain kind of aggression in sort of forcing your opponents to attack you, right? Like, he won a pawn, he made like a kind of weird gash into his own kingside position. And so it's like he's waved the red flag for Timur, right? And Timur's somebody who will attack you even if you don't wave a red flag. In fact, Timur's the kind of guy who will like attack you unless you wave a red flag. And then you wave a red flag and he's like, you know what? Normally I would just attack no matter what. But you waved a red flag, so I'm just going to do something different. And actually, he never really manages that good an attack this game. That's weird because Brian was definitely waving the flag here. He was like, come and kill me. Okay, so yeah, so the thing is, you know, and now like his queen is so awkward, he has to make yet another weakness. So he's got space on this side of the board, but it's like weaknesses too, right? And these are all like hooks that white could use to open up that area if he wants to at some point. C4 might be a useless move. Another aggressive move, F4. Limiting white's dark squared bishop, but dramatically weakening this diagonal. Knight d7, knight h3. Threatening knight takes g5 when everything collapses. Queen here. So, yeah, you know, h7's just hanging. He could take it. But instead goes to gain control of the light squares. This is logical. I mean, Timur makes a logical positional decision here about how to handle this. But it's like crazy that Brian has made these kind of weaknesses and spent time moving his queen and taking a pawn. And Timur's like, okay, I'll come up with a positional solution instead of some kind of like violent attack, right? If he took like this, I wonder if the idea wouldn't be to just try and trade off into an endgame like so, right? Like force these trades to try and survive. No, that couldn't be the plan. This is too good for white. Knight g5 at the end. So what is Brian planning on bishop takes h7? Like, why did this not tempt Timur? Okay, he's probably just planning knight e5 to avoid a check on g6. And after knight e5, his threat is to play bishop takes h3 and or knight f3 check. So that almost forces white into like knight to g1 or something. Then, I mean, material is still only equal. So white recovered his pawn, but black's got the h-file. Material's equal. How about just here and castle? This is great, right? Black has like some significantly good squares for his pieces, and white's a little bit cramped on the king side. This is a weird position, but probably pretty good for black. So that might explain why Timur doesn't grab the pawn. But somehow, like, he just doesn't match Brian's aggression this game. I mean, he goes for this trade, positionally desirable because he leaves all these white squares really weak for black. But in terms of tempi, he just spent 2 moves bringing black's pieces to e5 and c8. And you can see that black's better developed than white at this point. And now they both just castle. And white is really just, I don't know, lacking somehow in the aggression needed to develop his forces. I mean, now as I'm wanting to play like knight f2, it makes me wonder if this bishop couldn't have gone to e1, and then this pawn's hanging. So, maybe he should just have taken and gone back here at some point. So then I click back to this position where he played bishop f2. Oh, he couldn't have gone to e1 either way. Should he have done this? And moved his knight to e2 instead of h3? This didn't seem like that good a square. How about the way he played? Knight d7. Should he have gone knight e2 instead of h3 here? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm using a bunch of hindsight and like logical deduction to try and get at the answer a little bit faster. But I think, yeah, the knight had more potential on e2 than h3, and you could say that a lot of the awkwardness of White's position, his inability to really get an attack going, stems from knight h3 just not really panning out. I mean, I get that he's trying to put like pressure on this entire pawn chain, which makes a lot of sense, but he doesn't quite crack it. And if you don't quite crack it, then you end up being on a bad square, right? It's like when you h3 is like super committal, because if you don't break through on f4 or g5, your knight's like on a terrible square, and you don't really want black to play bishop takes h3, so you don't even have much time to break through, right? Like as soon as black plays knight e5, there's going to be this threat bishop takes h3, so you have to like break through fast, and he just doesn't. And in this position, Brian's now up a pawn with no compensation, really. But he chooses to press the issue very aggressively here. I mean, king h8 would be a good move. Like a6 to play b5 could make sense. Rook b8. There's various things he could do. But actually, I really like what he does, which is pressing here using the power of his rook and queen on the f-file. And that is where he's kind of strongest, so it makes sense. So the idea here is that if knight takes f4, he plays g takes f3. He's given up this, but he's gained f3 as an outpost himself. Knight e6. I guess just play around that knight. Yeah, just keep going. I mean, if white trades, then that's fine. The bishop's not that good. If white doesn't trade, you can put your bishop here if you want to, where it might be better, or just keep playing as is. Yeah, I mean, I would think white needs to trade off his bishop if he wants to try and get back into this game, positionally speaking, like keep up with black. But yeah, black looks way good. Your moves are weak. Whose moves are weak? Whites, blacks, my analytical suggestions. And so then alternatively, if white takes this way, he probably trades, and plays knight g4. And now the knight is still on h3, and he's opened this up. Maybe this actually is the first variation that actually like gives white some prospects for these pieces, though. All of these moves are weak. Okay. Well, if everything you see here is weak, then perhaps you should go find a computer to spend your time with instead of us. We'll be all right. We will cry a little bit, but we will survive your absence. I wonder actually if better than f takes e3 and letting white's bishop get into the game, maybe black played like f3 here. f3 might be interesting too, right? So I'm letting white keep this pawn, which has its risks. Yeah, it definitely has its risks, but I'm keeping this piece bad? Does this make any sense? I come, I don't know, here maybe? This takes. So now there's maybe knight d3 hanging over white. So maybe like rook here to get out of knight f3 as well. Takes here. I don't know. This is a weird idea. Maybe it's a bad one. Huh. It seems like white should take on g4 instead of what he did, which is e takes f4. I mean, I definitely thought this knight f4, gf3 looks bad for white. I wasn't impressed by this knight versus black just having everything good. So, but this fg4 is not as clear. fe3, bishop e3. This is like the simple way to do it. How good or bad is this? I mean, there's knight g5, there's bishop g5. Bishop g5 is not that good. Maybe knight g5. Maybe I shouldn't be so concerned as black. Maybe this is still just you're up a pawn and everything's okay. Maybe he's just fine making these trades. Maybe it doesn't make a huge difference to black. You know, some things get traded, but his pieces are all fine, and he's still up a pawn in the end game, and he still has the e5 square to remove the e-file pressure, and then eventually, you know, make a pass pawn on the queen side. So e takes f4 is played. Now Brian plays knight takes f3 check. Pawn has to take, and then he takes here. So he's still up exactly one pawn, but now white's really sorely lacking in dynamism for his bishop. And this pawn here is like a worry. Why not take e3 instead of move the queen? Oh, I think I know which position you mean. You mean right here after knight g5 where I played queen g6? I was playing queen g6 because white's threatening checkmate and 1 on h7. So that's why I didn't go for knight e3 and then dark square tactics. So I was avoiding that when I played here. All right, I think that was your question. So we get to this position here, and yeah, I think basically this bishop is bad, and black can always make a pass pawn on the queen side. So the position looks very good for black, and you know, white gets the rook to e6, but Brian just trades off queens with queen b2, saves his b pawn here because of check. And then if any pressure comes against the e file, like if white here put the other rook to e1, he can always just play bishop f6 to cover it. So king e2, he plays bishop f6. This defends this pawn and keeps this bishop from coming out. So now this piece is just so much worse than this one. And black has an extra pawn and two different plans for trying to win here. One plan is to play a6, b5. At the moment, looks hard to do. The other is to play like king here, rook g8, and h5, h4, and try to penetrate to g2 and attack these pawns of white's. And that's the one that looks most likely at the moment. It's the one that actually does happen in the game. So you see white's looking to play like a5, but then he hesitates when he sees how fast black's plan is coming on the king side. And he decides he doesn't have time for it. He has to deal with this pawn. This h-pawn is a grave concern here. So he gets a rook behind it. And black threatens rook g to g2, winning this piece here. So white trades. And so, you know, Brian actually sacks his h-pawn for absolutely nothing, just to trade off some pieces. And his pieces weren't even worse than white's, but he's just simplifying into something where he's very, very certain that he can win, because at the end of all this, he goes and wins back his pawn on a4. And once he grabs this a pawn, white can never crack his pawn structure, and he knows that this pawn structure is enough to win the game with. So he gets this endgame and starts cleaning up all the pawns. And wins a great victory as black against a very strong 2600 plus Grandmaster Timur Gareyev. So I think that was like super play from Bryant. I mean, like aggressive from move 4 on all the way through. And very, very Very strong play. Both in the opening, middle game, end game, all the technique. Very, very nice. Really just like a no chance game for Timur almost, right? I mean, he could have. He can choose different ways to handle this G4 move from Brian. He's got like some different kinds of positions he can go to here. They're all a pawn down, and they're all kind of like hard to decide which one gives him chances. None of them like clearly look good. So there's that. Maybe one of his different chances would have been better than what he did, because the version that he did play with this H pawn here and the doubled F pawns, this was probably one of his. It looks to me like his worst chance, but maybe only because I've already seen exactly how Brian won the game. So I'm like, I know exactly how to win from this position. And the other ones, I don't know exactly how to win because I haven't seen them played out. And then the other big question would be the choice between bringing his knight to h3 or e2. It really seems like knight h3 backfired this game. Like, he did not have enough pressure against f4 and g5, you know? I mean, in this position, it was Brian who chose to play g4. He didn't need to. He could have just left these pieces sticking here, and he could have kept building up if he had some other plan he wanted to do. So this knight just really didn't work, and this bishop was, kind of weak as well because he never cracked this pawn structure. So the question, the other option would be that, like, Timur maybe should have developed the knight to e2 and play like a slightly different game from that. But overall, I mean, like, if any mistakes by Timur, extremely subtle little ones, and then Brian just like destroys him this game. So that was a pretty impressive performance for